So, it's time to answer questions asked by $3 supporters for February of 2022. If you'd like to ask me anything in the month of March, just use the links below to Patreon or Subscribestar and become a supporter at least the $3 level. We'll start on Patreon, where Darth Vega asks, what are your thoughts on Steven Crowder from the show Louder with Crowder? I don't feel I've watched enough of him to come to a comprehensive opinion. You can probably guess that I agree with his more libertarian views and disagree when he goes more conservative. I don't know what more I can say about that. I will say, though, that I like the concept of his Change My Mind booth, where he invites people who disagree with him to engage him in a discussion. And when you can have a good discussion like that with someone who's engaging honestly and knowledgeably, regardless of who you might agree with, the viewer is always the one who's going to come away with the greatest benefit. Clashspride asks, I've recently gotten into the Warhammer universe, and sometimes you'll say comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Is this a spin on the followers of Khorne's motto, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne? Yep, you got the reference. It happened fairly organically. After I started getting shadow banned, I made my appeal to people to hit like, subscribe, and comment to appease the gods of the YouTube algorithm that they might bless the video with higher rankings. At one point, one user, I forget who, commented with comments for the common god, and I got the reference, so I responded with shares for the share throne, and I started using it. That one guy asks, your How to Argue For series is the thing I credit for turning me full libertarian. I've also used it to change my friends and family members' minds a lot, mostly the immigration one and the healthcare one. Awesome! It's always great to hear that. I'm especially proud of the healthcare one. My question is, are you ever going to make more? I'd really love to see How to Argue for the War on Drugs, or How to Argue for a Centralized Currency. I haven't in any way ruled it out. The problem is they take a lot of preparation, much more so than the other videos I do. Basically, with the prep I put into one of those videos, I can do 10 or so regular videos. It might be something I can do more easily once I expand my studio space, which I have the money to do right now, but the market is still too insane to want to try and do anything with it. But yes, How to Argue for the War on Drugs is on the list, and tentatively How to Argue for Inflation, which I might actually do now that people are actually saying inflation is a great thing and won't you stupid libertarians please shut up about it. But again, it takes a lot of time and preparation to do those well. Some others on my potential list are How to Argue for Global Warming, How to Argue for GMO Labeling, and How to Argue for Zoning. Over on Subscribestar, Tomasz Urbański writes, can you comment on the video by Computer Enhance, Cryptocurrency, What is the Blockchain Threat Model? My first comment is, this video is really long, and the guy is really wordy. If you want to see how to do that kind of video properly, look at David Rizik's videos over at Illinois Energy Prof. You don't feel like you're having your time wasted by a lot of introductory or incidental garbage, which makes sense since the guy's an actual professor who's used to delivering lectures on complicated subjects within a certain time frame. I mean, really, it starts with like 7 minutes of a rambling form of virtue signaling. Not a good start for someone claiming to be doing a security review, but we'll come back to that. He then spends several minutes praising elliptic curve cryptography and complaining that banks aren't using it, which I agree with 100%, but come on, man, get to the subject of the video. He then goes into a baffling rant about decentralization where I don't even get what his beef is. And now we're halfway through the video. Really, some chapter headings would have helped. Also frustrating that he's turned off comments. Finally, we get to the question.
What is the threat model that you have defined that current cryptocurrencies actually protect against that you think makes it possible to use them to decentralize payments?
And then he seems to go completely off the rails. He talks about blockchains and then says he doesn't understand what that has to do with the ECC. He's confusing two different parts of the system. The system that protects your wallets and allows you to make transactions, and the system that allows the network to verify those transactions in a public, immutable, international, censorship-free way. He rants about how ECC makes it impossible for someone else to fake a transaction from you, which is true, but he fails to consider that the rest of the network has to be sure that you aren't faking a transaction using coins that aren't yours. That is where the blockchain comes in. He says,
all we're trying to do with this system is make it so that you can't send one thing to one person and one thing to another and hope they never find out, right?
Which is a very wordy way of saying a double spend. But it's so much more than that. It's not just double spending, it's spoofing, it's tampering, it's repudiation, it's public verification without the need for a trusted third party. And that's without getting into other things that cryptocurrencies can do, such as smart contracts, which would be impossible without the blockchain. I mean, believe me, every crypto developer would love to find a way to do all of this without a blockchain, but it's not like this guy has any ideas, because he doesn't seem to understand the issues. He says,
so what you need to prove, in a threat model sense, if you want to convince me that there's any point to any of this like Bitcoin nonsense, in order to convince me that that serialization solves the problem of having a central authority, what you have to do is prove to me that all of the things that we currently rely on a central authority for, this replaces.
Okay, in what way hasn't that been done? The blockchain system guards not only against double spends, which he's already admitted to, and seems to me would be enough on its own, but it also prevents spoofing, the spending of made-up coins instead of the double spending of real coins. There's repudiation. Merchants have a big problem with fraudulent chargebacks where a customer buys something and then, once they have the goods, disputes the transaction. The bank has to sort that out, but it's an arduous and expensive process. Here we have the blockchain for that. And there's public verification. How do we know we can trust the banks? They've been caught doing fraudulent stuff before. That's the problem with trusted third parties. They can't always be trusted. You also don't have to worry about bank runs, bank failures, bank bailouts, or any of those other problems. Crypto even works internationally. It's very expensive to do international transactions through the banking system. Crypto doesn't even distinguish between them. It's just as easy to send crypto halfway around the world as it is to send it to your next door neighbor. You don't have to worry about banks cutting off customers, as we've seen, just because of things like their political views, either acting on their own or on behalf of the state like we just saw in Canada. There are no unbanked. The market is open to all. And above all, we don't have to put up with inflationary monetary policies which have destroyed over 96% of the wealth of Americans since 1913 and has been a lot worse in other countries like Brazil, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Turkey, and Venezuela. He thinks that none of this matters because of 51% attacks, as if those haven't been completely solved by things like the masternode system in Dash. He also complains that if you use crypto to pay 20 grand for a car, if you never get the car, you can't dispute it. Ignoring the escrow systems that crypto-based e-commerce sites have been using since the Silk Road days, he ignores this in order to strawman claims of people building a completely new legal system over this. That's without even getting into the idea of a reciprocal transaction, which would have a special transaction going in reverse in the form of an NFT that would contain the title of the car. You want to know his big issue? He says,
well, if we have a dispute resolution where we have people who log on and do this, you're just back to democracy. All you did was just reproduce the current state government online.
Yep, it's the whole "you're just making a government" canard, ignoring the fact that the government is a monopoly on force and a DRO would be a voluntary organization with competition and accountability. He's just another state cultist who doesn't understand the difference between rape and lovemaking. And again, we already do have completely voluntary escrow models that work very well, but he just can't get his cultist brain thinking that way and instead says,
I don't see how we ever get out of the model of dispute resolution going through a human process. And once you have a human process of dispute resolution, you have a government. That's what it is.
And now you know why he turned off comments. He even rants about the energy wasted, which I've debunked several times and which also ignores all the energy used by the Federal Reserve System, which far outstrips the energy used by crypto in just one country. He says,
"It's defending against threats we don't have."
As if unbanking isn't a threat. As if censorship isn't a threat. As if inflation isn't a threat. His blind spots are very telling. And I think this is where I can go back to my initial point about how long and rambling this is. Because when you know what you're doing and you have the facts on your side, like David Ruzek does, you can deliver clear, concise lectures. But guys like this present things the way they do, either because they don't have any real understanding of the subject, or because they're talking around their propaganda to try and disguise it. Finally, Rainbow Asteroids asks, how does Squirrel compare to U2F FIDO2? Very well, I think. U2F is universal second factor, but Squirrel is a universal first factor. It's the universal only factor. Remember that you only need that second factor because the first factor, generally passwords, are fundamentally insecure. With Squirrel, that isn't an issue. As for FIDO, it's always been this overcomplicated mess with all sorts of standards for things like biometrics and all that. Squirrel doesn't need any of that. You can use those things to secure your Squirrel identity, but Squirrel doesn't really care what you use to do that. Use the most secure option for that device. I'm not saying there's no reason for all the stuff in FIDO, but it's way overkill for the basic purpose of Squirrel, logging into websites. And complexity is the enemy of security. FIDO might be a better option for, say, logging into an enterprise network where an IT department can manage it, but for the home user, it's absolutely ridiculous. Keep in mind that FIDO is created by an alliance with people who have incentives other than keeping you safe, like Microsoft, who wants to control all your logins so bad they even use your online Microsoft password to log in locally on Windows 10. And although you can use a local password, it's extra steps to make it do that, and I'm constantly getting bugged with notifications telling me to use my Microsoft password. Squirrel is much easier to explain, it's incredibly lightweight, and it can be implemented quickly and easily. It can use special hardware, but doesn't have to. It's not tied to particular technologies like FIDO is. And also, Squirrel offers something FIDO just can't, which is complete identity lifecycle management. If a bad guy gets your keys, or it's threatened by malware or whatever, there is a single standard way of locking down your identity and rekeying it to lock out the hackers, which just isn't a part of FIDO. It's telling how the parts that FIDO does have in common with Squirrel, namely the automatic generation of unique public-private key pairs, came about. One of the FIDO developers, Brad Hill, saw Steve Gibson give a talk on Squirrel at the 2014 DigiCert Security Summit, and told Gibson that he'd solved every problem they'd been struggling with at the FIDO Alliance, and that key generation showed up in the standards soon after. The other operator in this space is WebAuthn, which has its own issues, mostly being tied to hardware that costs something like $50. It solves the problem that Squirrel can't right now, which is completely cutting off a man in the middle when logging in from a remote device. But keep a couple of things in mind. The first is that this mode of login is the exception with Squirrel. You absolutely do get those protections when logging in with the same device. Second, the only thing that Squirrel needs to do this with a remote device is standards for NFC or Bluetooth to make a two-way connection to the browser. And then it'll actually secure you better than WebAuthn does. But WebAuthn is doing this with special hardware-tied NFC standards. Just make some universal standards that can be implemented on any device, and then there's no advantage of using WebAuthn over Squirrel, and several that Squirrel has over WebAuthn. So that should cover it for this month. Thanks for watching, and please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. You'll also find the links to my Patreon and Subscribestar there, so you can become a regular supporter and get all my content early and ad-free. And you can also get other benefits like special Discord access, as well as monthly AMAs and shoutouts. Thanks again, and until next time, stay strong and be free.